I would like to share my story as, I guess what you could say, a victim of domestic violence. I wasn't physically abused, nor was I sexually abused. I wasn't emotionally abused. I wasn't verbally abused. I wasn't pushed. I wasn't punched. And I wasn't controlled. I am a victim of a crime that was committed. I am a victim of the ultimate form of domestic violence, homicide. I am the sister of someone who had their life taken away by the hands of another, by the hands of someone who was meant to love her, someone who was meant to care for her, and someone who was meant to protect her. It only took one cowardly act for me to have lost my sister forever. My sister Bianca was only 22 years old. She was a very bright, passionate person. Her passion lied within ending violence in the lives of young women and women who were or were at risk of homelessness. Bianca worked alongside organisations to help make change. She was one to march at Reclaim the Night, an international rally against sexual violence in the lives of women and children. She held a stall at Out of the Shadows, an event for young people to raise awareness and find solutions to domestic and family violence. Bianca worked tirelessly to help those who needed it most. It just so happened that the one thing she was fighting towards was the same thing that killed her. On the 30th of March 2010, my sister, Bianca Faith Gerben, was strangled to death by her boyfriend. As you can imagine, this was and still is a horrible tragedy for my family, something we are yet to still live with every day. Bianca's death has left a big hole in my heart and in my life, and what helps to fill this hole is Bianca's son Ziggy, who I care for. I'd like to point out that domestic violence can and often does go unrecognised. Here is what some of Bianca's closest family had to say about Bianca, the DV, and how their lives have changed. Did you know Bianca was in a violent relationship?
No, not necessarily. I always thought Bianca and he were very close and very happy. But there was an incident that I was aware about, and now when you look back at it after losing her, you realise how bad it is. Where he had a moment one night and held a knife to Bianca's throat, which scared her, but she was able to talk him down. It wasn't anything. There was no fight or anything. It was just something he did. And now that I look back at it, obviously that was a huge sign, but Bianca told me about it a while later because she didn't want to upset me, obviously, and everything was okay apparently, but yeah, now I look back at it, there was obviously a sign that we weren't aware of.
And in what way has Bianca's passing affected your life?
My life? Well, every way. It's murder, to lose a child is, they say, the worst thing. To lose your child to murder, I'm sure it's 100 times worse, but to lose your child to murder by somebody they loved and trusted, that betrayal, that pain of that betrayal is unbearable. The replay in your head of what might have occurred that night to your baby is a permanent thing that goes on in my mind. It's unbearable. I would not be alive today if I didn't have 2 more daughters and my grandchildren. They're the only reason I'm here. No day's easy. You have triggers continually all day of your anxiety and anguish and pain and hurt and anger over what happened to your baby. It's just, life isn't the same, and anybody who hasn't gone through this, let me tell you, you are so lucky and you are so blessed, because this is hell.
And what do you want to see done in the future for women who are in DV relationships?
Can't be swept under the carpet. It just has to, the community has to absolutely 100% know how bad it is, and with what's happening, you know, especially here in Queensland over the last year, we've had some of the most horrific domestic violence deaths, and the person that died, my gosh, didn't deserve it. It has to be brought out public more. People have to know. They have to speak up. There has to be places where you can go and say, I'm in a domestic violence relationship and I do need help. I don't know how it gets fixed, because there's only so much the police can do without actual proof. So there must be some other avenue where a stop can happen, where children and women especially can be protected, and men have to be taught. More importantly, they have to be taught to be able to walk away. If something isn't right, walk away. If your child is screaming and it's driving you nuts, don't touch the baby, just put it in the cot and go for a walk outside. If your wife is upsetting you, go for a walk, leave her. But please don't touch them. Keep your hands off your family.
Did you know that there was any violence in Bianca's relationship?
No, I was completely unaware there was any violence at all in Bianca's relationship.
And what do you think we as women need when it comes to being in a DV situation?
For starters, I think more education. Education from a younger age, like teenagers, in schools and things like that. Just so they know, as well as other women as well, know that there are people out there, there's organisations out there, lots of groups, people that do care, are willing to help, are there to help, and that they have other areas that they can go to if they need help leaving a relationship, if they need financial assistance, they can get it. Women need to know these things, and a lot of women don't know these things, and that, you know, for those reasons I think that they do stay inside of that a violent relationship, thinking that they don't have anywhere to turn to. They've got mainly financial reasons, if they're thinking that they better stay because they've got nowhere to go to, no home to go to, or nobody's going to help them. But everybody needs to be aware that there are groups and organisations and people who are there to help everybody.
I am Bianca's youngest sister. I wasn't that close to Bianca at the time of her passing. Bianca and I were always very on and off with our relationship. This is now one of the biggest regrets I now live with. Bianca's passing has taken its toll on my life and very much on my mental health. I now suffer from depression, PTSD and anxiety. I find my life a lot harder since Bianca passed. Even when I do have my good days, there is always some form of sadness in my heart and holding me back from enjoying daily life activities. I knew Bianca had a boyfriend, but as we weren't that close, I didn't really know anything about him or how they were together. I was previously in a violent relationship and know how hard it is to get out of. I urge all women who are in DV to find the support they are needing to get out of it. You may not think that DV is that bad, but I have found out the hard way that something so serious as murder can happen and does happen. You may think it won't ever happen to you. I thought it would never happen, but it does. Living with this pain is not easy, and I do not want anyone to go through what my family and many others have to.
Bianca and I were very close friends, not just sisters. Bianca and I were living together with our 2 children at the time of her passing. Bianca's boyfriend had been a family friend of ours for many years and spent a lot of time with us at our house. I'd known of one occasion, years beforehand, where there was a case of violence against Bianca within their relationship. However, I never really thought that much into it. It wasn't something that had ever been brought up after it had happened. As of today, I still don't know if there was any more violence in their relationship, and it is something I often do think about. So if we think about Bianca's relationship, she never spoke about any violence, there was no difference in the way she presented, her closest family and friends didn't even know anything was going on. So how do we help someone who is in a similar situation to Bianca? We can't really directly help someone if we don't know that there is any violence going on in their relationship, if it's not spoken about, if nothing's ever been mentioned about it before. But what we can do is continue to raise awareness about domestic violence. We need women and children to know where they can turn to when faced in a violent situation. We need women to feel safe and to know that they aren't alone and that there are people out there willing to help them. What is domestic violence?
Domestic violence is violence within the home. It could be between husband and wife, or girlfriend, boyfriend. It's just, violence within the home.
And what supports and services do you know that are available to those who are in a DV relationship?
The only one I know of is DV Connect.
Yeah. And do you know what sort of supports that they give out?
They help getting victims of domestic violence out of the relationship and help them set up a new life.
What signs should we be looking out for, and how can we help those who we think may be in a violent relationship?
Signs would be controlling of money, controlling what you wear, who you speak to, where you go, going through your phones and emails and stuff. And how you can help is by talking to them and trying to work out a plan of how to get them out of the relationship.
So what is domestic violence?
Domestic violence, what I think, is when the mother or a woman and children are in trouble and they're hurt verbally or abusive. That's what I think.
Okay. And what supports and services do you think are available to those who are in a domestic violent relationship?
The only one I know is called DV Connect. I haven't heard of any others.
What is domestic violence?
Domestic violence is abuse in a relationship. It can be physical, emotional, it can even be stuff like controlling money.
And what supports and services do you think are available to those who are in a DV relationship?
I don't really know any services.
So what is domestic violence?
I think domestic violence is any sort of abuse in the household between family members and partners.
Yeah. And what sort of supports do you think are available to those who are in a DV relationship?
I don't know about any sort of support.
What signs should we be looking out for, and how can we help those who we think may be in a violent relationship?
Well, the signs you need to look out for if they're in a physically violent relationship, there'll be things like cuts or bruising or anything like that if they've hurt themselves, and stuff like that for physical. And there's a lot more, with emotional violence, it's hard to tell, but they could be pulling away from their friends and their family and just kind of staying in the house and losing contact with a lot of people. And if you know someone that's in a violent relationship, you should just be careful about what you say and be very discreet about it. Give them 100% of your support and maybe link them up with things like DV Connect and let them know that there's support out there and that you'll be there for them and you'll help them get out. But just keep it discreet. So set up a plan with them before they leave their partner, because it's one of the main things, and just don't let the partner know.
What supports and services do you know of that are available to those who are in a DV relationship?
I don't know any.
How would you help someone who you think may be in a violent relationship?
Well, if someone is in a violent relationship, I could search up in the internet and, find out some research and link them up, with a service that could help them get help.
So here is a story about a young woman, a young mother, who had previously been in a really bad domestic violent relationship with an ex-partner.
I was in a relationship for 7 years. It started out, just sort of yelling and stuff and pushing, and then it got to really, really violent stuff like choking and hospitalisation and stuff like that.
Was the violence there from the beginning, or did it slowly start happening over time?
there was violence, oh, I shouldn't say violence, there was like probably more emotional and mental abuse to start with, and then probably say 6 months into the relationship, that's when it started being physical.
Yep. And how did it affect your relationships with friends and family?
After probably say 5 years, I had friends giving me ultimatums of either, you know, it's you leave him, otherwise we're not going to be your friend anymore. My family wasn't talking to me at the time. He didn't speak to his family, or very rarely. So I was pretty much like on my own. It was just him and I.
Did any of your friends or family try and help you get out of the relationship, or did they just stay out of it?
Yeah, no, they did try to help me. Like, my parents helped me a couple of times, but then in the end they just wiped their hands clean of me, because there was also, you know, like drugs and alcohol involved. And then because I kept going back, they just couldn't help me anymore. And with my friends, they ended up giving up too, because they didn't like seeing me the way I was when I'd come knocking on their door, and they just said to me that they couldn't do it anymore. They didn't want to help.
And how did it affect your parenting?
So after I had my son, like, there was violence all throughout my pregnancy. And I'd have him sort of like saying to me, you know, like, are you going to love this baby more than you love me? And just sort of mind game stuff. And then after I had my son, he saw a lot of violence between his father and I. And in the end, I kind of gave up. And like, if I couldn't beat him, I'd just join him. So I started, you know, I lowered myself to his standards, and probably even lower. And I guess that was a lot to do with self-esteem and self-confidence too, that was being shattered. And so with my parenting, I was there, but I wasn't there, and he wasn't my number one priority.
I'm here today to talk to you about a different aspect of domestic violence, and that is the impact that domestic violence can have on children. I think if a child isn't directly experiencing abuse themselves, that people kind of underestimate the repercussions that a domestic violence situation can have on children. And oftentimes they're referred to as the silent victims because of this, but hopefully today I'm able to bring them a voice. So the impacts of domestic violence can actually start antenatally, which I think is probably a relatively unknown fact for most people. So if a woman is in a situation where she's experiencing violence or around a perpetrator of violence, then understandably her stress hormone is going to be elevated. And this stress hormone called cortisol, that's elevated or around in high instances in pregnancy, can actually have impacts on the fetus. These impacts include things like poor fetal growth, adverse impacts on their brain development, reduced immune system, and that means that once the baby's born, they may have higher instances of illness, anxiety, sleep disturbances, extreme startle responses, and part of that too is because the high levels of cortisol can also impact their stress regulating system. So after the baby's born, if there continues to be domestic violence in the home for the woman and the baby, then the impacts can continue for the child. I guess if you consider the mental implications of domestic violence on a woman, it's pretty easy to understand why it might be hard to concentrate on developing that relationship and that attachment with a baby. Part of this could be that if there is an instance of domestic violence happening, a woman is going to feel fear or anxiety and so forth, and if an infant sees that on her face, the infant doesn't necessarily know that this is because of something external. The infant might misinterpret that facial expression as something frightening to them, and then it's hard for them to put that trust and that feel that security with that person with that expression on their face. also a woman in a relationship with domestic violence is likely to experience anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, phobias, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, even PTSD and self-harm. And I mean, I could go on here, but I think that will help you see how hard it could be to build an attachment when you've got all of those other emotions going on.
And also go back to the not being able to beat him, so I joined him. I ended up, because there was alcohol on his behalf and drugs and alcohol on my behalf. But in the end I lost my son, and I ended up in rehab, and I was there for 14 months. And so my son was he'd just turned 2. And so I was in rehab for 14 months, and I've only had him back now for 6 months solid.
Many women who experience violence are still courageously able to develop a good relationship and a strong, secure attachment with their infant, and are still able to give the responsive and loving and sensitive mothering to their infant that their infant needs. But unfortunately, this doesn't mean that their child is free from the repercussions of domestic violence. We're all a product of our developmental history, as the saying goes. And if in your development you have good experiences and positive and loving experiences, then you're in a really optimal position to learn and to develop. And in a household where there's domestic violence, it's not always really easy to give those positive experiences and that optimal learning opportunity. Violence in a household can sometimes be normalised to a child. So if they witness a violent period, then they might see that their mother dissociates from the violence, doesn't talk about it, and acts like everything is normal to the child. And this can be really tricky for a little child who is trying to understand their feelings and trying to make sense of the world and trying to learn what behaviours they can expect to be appropriate from other people or inappropriate from other people.
So when you were in a violent relationship, did you receive any support from services?
At the time, I think because I was so, not right and so off the track, I didn't know that there was help out there. I didn't really go looking for it either. I guess I wish somebody had sort of come to me and said, hey, look, this is sort of like where you can go, or you can go here and there'll be some sort of support. But that's what I wish I had someone say to me.
So you didn't know of any support that was available to you? If you were to have found some support, what sort of support do you think you would have needed to get you out of that relationship?
I think I needed some sort of like positive counselling around domestic violence, and someone telling me that it's okay and that I'm not alone, like I'm not the only one that this is happening to. And that sort of support, and just sort of someone slowly being able to help me build my confidence up to get out of that relationship.
It's really difficult to confine the impacts of domestic violence on a child to only a few minutes, but hopefully I've been able to raise a little awareness of the repercussions on children today. And just the final thing I think is important to talk about is where to from here, and how can a woman who's had violence in her life or is experiencing violence in her life help her child. And the first answer to that is that the woman needs to not blame herself, and hopefully is able to find someone that she can turn to for emotional support for herself, because the mother's mental health and well-being is really important, and that's going to be something that helps her child. In terms of her child, firstly, the child needs to be given lots of cuddles, lots of love, and lots of reassurance that it's not their fault, and the violence, isn't their fault.
Domestic violence in the lives of young women is very common. If a woman is willing enough to get out of that relationship, there may be a lot of barriers that she will face. These barriers could be around financial troubles, so not having a place to go and not knowing how to get there. She might have minimal support from family members and friends. Lots of mixed emotions. I guess feeling really scared, feeling lost and very alone. If she is parenting, I guess this is a lot harder as well. As a single person, I guess you could really just pack your things up and get out of that relationship if, of course, you were that willing to do so. You could stay at family members' houses and friends and just couch surf from there. When you have children, it gets a lot harder. You know, you have to have a stable life ready for your children. So you have to have a stable place where you can go to. This is why it is important for us to take a stand on domestic violence. We need to break down the barriers that these women may face so that they can live a life without fear. As you can see from this presentation, it is painfully obvious that domestic violence is still a taboo subject. I hope that this is the generation that will make change. This can only come about by early education and a willingness and openness to discuss DV with adolescents, as this is where relationships between men and women begin to form. We also need to take steps in cutting out a lot of the red tape in domestic violence. For example, if there was a woman who experienced some violence within her household and was to call the police would ask if she has a DVO against the person. If she doesn't, I guess the police are, really powerless as to what they can do in a situation like that. She'll then have to apply through the courts for a DVO. Something with such an easy solution should be made a lot less complicated for women who are in a DV relationship. I implore all of you here today to be the change that this society needs. It is important for all of us here today to support each other in raising awareness about domestic violence and the terrible effects it has on people like you and me. Too many lives are hurt and too many lives are lost. It shouldn't happen.